We're diving straight into some frankly terrifying macroeconomic data defining the 2026 global economy. No sugarcoating it, we are looking at a fundamental transition away from established multilateral frameworks and straight into a highly fragmented, highly volatile world order. And to kick this off, we're starting with a number that should have absolutely everyone on edge. $1.9 trillion. Yeah, you heard that right. That is the projected United States federal budget deficit for fiscal year 2026. This isn't just a big number for the sake of being big. It represents a massive 5.8% of the nation's entire GDP. Let that sink in. And that massive deficit pushes the debt held by the public to a staggering 101% of GDP. We're crossing a critical red line threshold here that is fundamentally altering sovereign debt markets as we know them. You know that safety premium we've all historically attached to U.S. Treasuries? Well, it's eroding. Fast. It's just buckling under the sheer weight. Now, the really scary part? This debt explosion is happening exactly as our $126 trillion global economy is stalling out. It's like we're hitting the brakes and the gas at the exact same time. We are weighed down by extreme geopolitical divergence, fractured supply chains, and the active weaponization of critical commodities and trade routes. The baseline consensus out there indicates a tenuous resilience in global growth, but honestly, that's masking severe regional and sectoral disparities. The entire international system has rapidly transitioned into a fragmented transactional reality. Basically, the old rules simply no longer apply. We are fully in a new rules, no rules paradigm, driven by aggressive state capitalism and the systematic erosion of those global multilateral institutions we used to rely on. Okay, before we unpack the survival playbook for all this and look at the actual asset allocations you're going to need, please note our standard investment disclaimer. This explainer is strictly for informational purposes only. It doesn't constitute financial advice. Investing always entails market volatility risks, charges, and expenses, so please carefully consider your objectives. And remember, past performance is absolutely no guarantee of future results. Section 1. America's AI debt boom. Let's dive right into this first massive divergence and see how the United States is essentially defying global economic gravity right now. We are looking at a really stark bifurcation in 2026. On one hand, you've got a booming AI-driven U.S. economy, fueled by CapEx and OBDBA stimulus. And completely contrasting that, the deeply deflationary, energy-shocked, and stagnating economies of China and Europe. It is literally a tale of two entirely different economic realities. Looking at the revised 2026 GDP forecasts, global growth has been downgraded to 3.1%. But U.S. exceptionalism, it remains incredibly strong at 2.8%. That heavily outpaces the euro area's meager 1.1% and Japan's near 0.9%. China is sitting at 4.4%, but as we'll see, that number hides a lot of internal friction. What's fascinating is that U.S. growth is currently totally untethered from traditional cyclical drivers. Instead, it's relying on massive fiscal stimulus from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, which just injected $100 billion in consumer tax refunds. Add to that an absolutely unprecedented capital expenditure supercycle in artificial intelligence, and you see what's really propping things up. But actually, there's a really dark side to this exceptional growth. Net interest payments on the national debt are surging, jumping 6.1% higher than the previous year. That's just through the first half of fiscal year 2026. This is literally the fastest growing segment of the federal budget right now. To put that into perspective, the Congressional Budget Office projects these net interest costs will double by 2036. Think about that. They're on track to consume a terrifying 25% of all federal revenue, 1/4 of everything coming in, just paying interest. It's outpacing almost every other government outlay out there. So if you want to stay ahead of this unprecedented macroeconomic debt shock, and you want to understand the specific tactical shifts required to actually protect your portfolio, hit that subscribe button right now. We master this complex global data so you don't have to. Section 2. Europe and China's deflation. Let's move across the globe and look at why the rest of the world is struggling so incredibly hard to keep pace. Europe enters 2026 pretty much under siege. Eurozone GDP growth is hovering near stagnation at 1.1%. They're facing a stagflation-light environment characterized by a fundamental weakening of their industrial base.
They're dealing with the permanent loss of cheap Russian energy, and to top it all off, the political center is fracturing across France, Germany, and the UK. It's completely paralyzing their economic policy.
Meanwhile, over in China, they are trapped in a domestic deflationary spiral. But their strategy? They are aggressively leveraging their total dominance of the electric stack. They are flooding global markets with heavily subsidized electric vehicles, batteries, and advanced robotics. Essentially, they're exporting their deflation and sparking this fierce protectionist backlash all over the world.
Section 3. Geopolitics and energy crises. The crucial takeaway here is that this economic fragility in Europe and Asia isn't happening in a vacuum. It's colliding head-on with a rapidly deteriorating geopolitical landscape.
We are now operating in that new rules, no rules transactional world order we talked about earlier. The Iran-Israel conflict has triggered severe global oil supply shocks. You've got the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, plus the strategic manipulation of critical supply chains and maritime routes. This has completely derailed central bank easing cycles and spiked inflation right when everyone thought we finally had it under control.
As the Global Strategic Outlook 2026 report puts it, our economic outlook is defined by a, quote, resilience tested by fire, end quote. And they mean that literally. The supply-side constraints being introduced into the market right now are totally comparable in nature and potential devastation to the oil crisis we saw back in the 1970s.
Section 4, No Rules Investment Playbook. Okay, so this brings us to the ultimate solution. We've seen all this terrifying data, so exactly how should you allocate your assets to survive this chaotic, fragmented global order? The secret to surviving 2026 is waking up to the fact that we are facing a permanent structural regime shift. In a no-rules world, success requires transitioning from cyclical to structural analysis. This isn't just a temporary dip that's going to smooth out by next quarter. You've got to secure hard assets and adjust your strategy to a world that has permanently changed. Look at the empirical evidence here. Disciplined strategic asset allocation, or SAA, is actually responsible for roughly 80% of long-term performance. 80%. It is essentially the only true anchor you have in a highly volatile, completely unpredictable market. So, to play and actually win in this specific environment, you need to commit to broad geographic and sector diversification. You absolutely need to utilize precious metals as an essential portfolio pillar against all this energy volatility. And you have to focus on supply chain localization, while also exploring alternative private markets and hedge funds. The baseline takeaway is that our $126 trillion global economy isn't just growing anymore. It is fundamentally reconfiguring into a multipolar order. It's becoming a far more expensive, technologically divided landscape. The margin for error here is razor thin, and only the most adaptable portfolios are going to make it out alive. The old economic rulebook is basically ashes at this point. But if you want to understand the exact artificial intelligence technology that is single-handedly driving America's economic exceptionalism and keeping the U.S. afloat amidst all this chaos, click here to watch our deep dive AI explainer right now. Don't wait. Click the explainer on your screen, keep learning, and I'll see you over there.